we will continue deepening into the understanding of the standardization process. We'll get with us an additional colleague, Joanna, who will present later, and is belonging to the team of Nuno. So we can immediately start with the content. So as I said, Nuno and myself will give you more information about the context of European Commission, harmonized standard, standardization request, and all this, let's say, additional layer that we have for harmonized standard. And then Joanna will speak about the Vienna Agreement. So like this morning, a couple of additional abbreviation. I think I will just take the new one. HLN, it's harmonized standard. TB, technical body. TBO, technical body officer. QC, very important, it's a new concept, quality check. LOC is lack of compliance assessment. LCA is last confirmatory assessment. Ernst & Young is a HRS contractor. It's a company who is providing the service of assessment of harmonized standard. EC, you know EC. ESO, you know. ISOCF, you should know. Vienna Agreement, you should know. So we go directly into this new chapter, new approach directive. What are the new approach directive? They define essential requirements, mainly in the field of health and safety. They are supposed to indicate what shall be achieved without specifying how, and we are specifying how. They are transposed in the member state legislation. So, but of course, the standards are very important to support this type of legislation. And in order to do that, the European Commission will issue what we call standardization requests. So what we do, basically, we issue European standards to support and meet the essential requirements of those European directives. And this is described into this little pyramid. So on the top, you have, of course, the legislative process, which is development of the EU legislation, can be directive or regulation. This is the public authority. So the various national authorities are inputting into the council, while the Commission is supposed to make the proposal, and there is a third body, of course, representing the citizens. Those are the representatives of the European Parliament. So this type of EU legislation is setting what goals to reach, and of course, they are regularly revised when the policy requires for revision. And we, at the bottom, we are developing the European standard with CEN, with our colleague of CENELEC and also ETSI to support specific European legislation. We are private independent organization, and we used to produce a voluntary standard. Just to remind you, the standards are voluntary, and most of the time, and they are providing a way on how to reach goal. And of course, as mentioned this morning, the standards are revised every 5 years or confirmed when suitable to reconfirm. So this is more or less the little path that we will describe in terms of legislation and how to tackle this legislation. It is a kind of cycle. On the top left, we have, of course, we start with EU legislation, directive or regulation, which describe a series of essential requirements. But the legislation alone cannot really achieve its means. And in order to get the support of standardization, the European Commission has also to plan the development of standardization requests. And how they do that, they insert into the Union Work Program for Standardization all the strategic topic that they would like to get standards from. So in order to do that, they will list a series of potential needs for standardization requests, and this is done annually. And so when we receive this program, we share, of course, the program with our members, and we get feedback, we can get some news, some new input, etc. And this will allow the European Commission to prepare standardization requests. Yes?
Mind going back to this page?
Previous page, this one.
We have two different, I would call it maybe contradictions on one side, because on one side we have a kind of a public authority that is mandatory, and you have written down there voluntary on the standardization side and how to reach the goal. Is this sometimes challenging to reach the goal? Means that you get always the interest from maybe the industry or volunteers to work on a standardization request? Normally, it's as you mentioned, standardization work is on voluntary base. That doesn't mean that if you get a standardization request from the European Commission, that you always have the appropriate experts in place to work on a standardization request. Is this sometimes challenging, or from your experience?
Yes, there are, of course, a lot of challenge. There you are already entering into the details of what would be the, let's say, the process of the standardization request and the challenge, etc. Why I mention voluntary? Because the standards are not public act. They are documents which are a kind of agreement between the stakeholders. And when they are published, they are normal documents, they are voluntary documents. They start to get a different status when they are referred in the official journal. There it is not mandatory documents, but it is more a document which is supporting legislation. The documents remain voluntary. Of course, it can happen that the document is inserted into a legislation, and then it becomes mandatory because it is becoming part of the legislation. Now, because you asked several questions, when we get standardization request, there is a new need. And of course, then through the members, we will try to get expertise. And when we will discuss the content of the standardization request, we may, of course, discuss the text, but we may also discuss the program, the workload that we will get. It happens sometimes, for example, in the field of cybersecurity, we were asked to develop standards within 2 years, which on a new topic, it's possible, as you know. And certainly on such a complicated topics, we were asked to do it in 2 years. Okay, they prolong, etc. And also sometimes, despite we are supposed to describe and to decide where and how we will develop the standard, it may happen that there are some intervention from the Commission, and they will ask to do this in a specific area. And get some example, certainly from Nuno as well, in the field of construction, where they want the standard in a very defined layout. But normally the standard remain voluntary. So I was just here saying that it's a conceptual, yeah? We have now a standardization request. So when we get a standardization request, we create what we call a SRAC, standardization request ad hoc group, where indeed we invite all the experts from the field where there is an interest. you may imagine that if we are developing machine, we will invite all the TCs involved in machinery. If we are speaking about railways, of course, we will invite the TCs related to railways, plus some key European organization. And quite often we work also with the European Commission to understand better what exactly they mean with some of the clauses of standardization request. We will get a series of comments that we will feed back to the Commission. The Commission will give us a new request, a new draft of the request. And finally, I will not enter into the detail because I think it will be covered also tomorrow. Finally, there is an acceptance of the standardization request, and we are able to start developing standards. So is this phase, when we have the standardization request, we are due to develop European standards, and we can do it via our homegrown CEN technical committees and develop pure ENs, but we can also do it by using standards from ISO or IEC. And of course, we will discuss later the mechanism of transfer of the ISO standard into the European collection. Then, when the standard is finalized, we arrive in this box. The standard will be, of course, what I describe here is very ideal situation where everything goes smoothly and ideally. So we get the standard published. It has been made, it has received a compliance assessment, and so we can refer to the standard in the official journal. And by having this referencing of the standard in the official journal, we get the full presumption of conformity, and the industry can use the standard to put the product on the market. And the loop continue because either there will be a new directive with a new mandate, etc., or the standardization request foresee that there could be several revisions of the same standard during a period of time. Nowadays, the standardization requests are limited in time. So basically, we have a lot of topics, over 20 here. We just quoted a couple of typical examples of NLF type directive. I will not spend too much time on that. So to summarize, the new approach is based on standardization request, which is the precondition for getting the possibility to cite the standard in the OJEU. In order to get this standard referred in the OJEU, the standard needs to get compliance assessment. And the compliance assessment are in fact checking that the standards are in line with the legal requirements of the directive. And in order to do that, in CEN, we develop annex ZA. In CENELEC, it will be annex ZZ, but here we are in a session on CEN, so I will speak always of annex ZA. So the process, of course, implies that the desk officer at the Commission will have the responsibility and will decide to refer to the standard in the OJEU. And when he decides that, of course, based on he will prepare a decision which will be blessed by the College of Commissioners, and then it will become an implementing act, and the standard will be published in the official journal. I will come back later in which journal it is done. And again, only when the standards are listed in the OJEU, the manufacturer can use the standard, and the standard obtain the presumption of conformity. Now, I come back briefly on the content of standardization request. This is the basic content of a classical standardization request. So the Article 1 refer usually to the legislation, the policy, which lead to the request made to us. The Article 2 will ask for a work program. The work program basically will be defined in the annex because one way or another we will have in the annex a kind of exhaustive description of the standard necessary to support the standardization request. But when we got the standardization request, we need to give a real work program. What are the real activities we will, and normally we will try to quote the work items when they exist, etc. But we need to define a work program of the standards which will address the standardization request. Next to this work program, which usually is issued, let's say, depends, 3 months up to 6 months after acceptance of standardization request, there is a need for having an annual reporting. So every year we need, via CCMC has to compile the input of all the TCs falling within the standardization request. The CCMC will send an annual reporting describing the progress and the change, possible change in the work program related to the standardization request. Article 4 describe usually the validity of the standardization request. And Article 5 will describe the expiry date. It means that you can have several dates for each of the work items of the standardization request, but the standardization request ultimately will have an end date, and this is the expiry of the standardization mandate. And then more important for us, of course, is the content of the annex, because the annex will contain 2 types of information that will give some requirements that we need to tackle in relation to the standardization request, and then a list or a kind of list describing what are the harmonized standards that we will need to develop. So basically here, probably you saw this already, this is a model of an annex ZA in the field of machinery, where for each of the essential requirements on the first column, we will have to match the clause of the standard supporting the essential requirement listed in column 1. There is possible column 3, which usually is not used so much, but can specify some specific information related to the relevance of this match of the clause to the essential requirements. When the standard is finally ready and offered to the Commission, and when the Commission will, the College of Commissioners will have accepted the proposal, the standard will be published in the L list of the official journal. In the past, they were put in another list, which was more for information, but following series of legal cases, the Commission decided it was necessary that the standards are appearing in the L list, which are the legal part of the official journal. Also, in the past, the Commission was listing a full list. Nowadays, the Commission will only list the new topic which enter into the field of the directive, and also the topics which will be withdrawn because they are outdated, etc. Nevertheless, there is therefore for each of the the act of the Commission, there is a few items in the official journal, but nevertheless, the Commission maintain in the form of PDF or Excel the full list of the standards falling within the frame of a directive. So basically, it's another, I think you saw this maybe this morning. It is another way to explain that the European Commission requests standardization request to CEN Standardization, and CEN Standardization is then tasked to develop the European standards, which are then assessed, and the fact that they assess positively and that the desk officer is confirming this assessment will allow offering of the standard in the official journal. So we are back here. And based on that, of course, we get for the industry the presumption of conformity for their product. In order to get the assessment, you hope to get compliant assessment, of course. The Commission is contracting a consultancy company, which is called here as HAS contractor, and for the moment is the company Ernst & Young, who got the contract in August 2022. There was previously another contract in 2018. Usually the contracts are for a duration of 2 + 2 years. And the task of the contractor is, first task is administrative and logistical task. So it needs to administrate the flow of information from CEN Standardization to them, back to CEN Standardization to report to the Commission. They need to recruit their consultant, to give contract for their consultant, work order, etc. This is the administrative and logistical task. They need also to accept when you want to have a meeting with a consultant, again, administrative task. They have a second task, which is the horizontal verification and check of non-technical nature. So it is more to check that the consultant have fulfilled the documentation they are supposed to fulfill, and they are doing it in a consistent way. There is also a kind of check by a kind of quality check team, which verify the assessment result and the way those consultants are providing their assessment, because it may happen that some consultants of the same sector do not have the same approach in evaluating a document. So it is important that within Ernst & Young there is a certain level of equal quality of the standard and equal treatment of the task their consultants are carrying out. And of course, next to that, there is communication and information to the technical body. So it means that when we receive the documents, the assessment, of course, they are communicated to the TC Secretariat. But it is also important for Ernst & Young to inform the Commission, because they could detect that there are things which are not properly understood by the technical committee. So there could have also questions from the consultant. So those are the type of things that Ernst & Young will carry. We can say that maybe for those who were already working for CEN Standardization community before 2022, we had a problem of resourcing at the end of the previous contract. So it means that during a certain period, we had not enough resource to obtain assessment from the consultant. So it was obviously blocking the process and delaying the the finalization of harmonized standards. With this new contract, the Commission has increased the budget, so there are more consultants, there is more time to assess. In general, I mean, maybe some sectors are a little bit reduced, it has been equilibrated, but also there is more time for communication and meeting participation. So there is really more time allocated for the consultant to get an exchange with a working group convener or technical body officers in order to understand and resolve the comments the consultant has initiated. Little piece of information to be noted. Nowadays, the assessment report, for reason of GDPR, are anonymous. So if you do not know the style of your consultant, you will, and if there are many consultants in this area, maybe you do not know who has issued the assessment. But sooner or later, when you get a meeting, you will discover who is in front of you. So Ernst & Young manages this pool of consultants at their discretion. So it can sometimes, we usually from CCMC technical sector, we try to have always the same consultants or the same technical committees. I think it's something that Ernst & Young is trying to do, but it's not for sure that it will always be the same consultant who will tackle one of the topics of your technical committee. So in theory, the consultant, the Ernst & Young has 5 weeks to assess the documents, but in practice, it takes much more than that. I do not remember what are the latest statistics. So as you can see from this slide, Ernst & Young is covering a broad range of legislation. Some are linked to some big units, like DG GROW Unit H2, where there are several directives. Others are from different units of DG GROW. There are also other DGs intervening and asking for the service of Ernst & Young consultants. Now, a little reminder, we have been repeating this quite often, but it's important to remember that the HRS consultants are only there to perform assessment. It is the biggest workload that they have. They need only to check that the standards, the clause of the standard are really matching the essential requirements of the directive and that there are no gaps. They can participate in meetings, but it is, let's say, limited to around 25% of the time they spend in the study of the standard. Of course, they can also work as ambassador from EC because they are supposed to get the instruction directly from the desk officer of EC, and they need to implement it in the recommendations they give to the technical committees. The consultant cannot contribute in the development of the standard. Do not ask the consultant for an advice on how to draft a clause in order to get a positive assessment. They are not allowed to do that. They are not even allowed to offer guidance to TCs on how to help them to get the standard compliant. And they can only provide the assessment on the official documents received directly from us via a platform. It's no sense to try to send them guidelines or justification or any additional documents. They cannot take this into account. And they cannot also modify an assessment that they have submitted to their boss. So they need, when the assessment is completed, is validated by Ernst & Young and sent back to us, they cannot change it, even if there are mistakes. And they can only participate in meetings with us and when they get the approval from CEN. And so we come to this. There is a website, so you can find here the website, which allow you as TC secretary to request for a meeting. So you need to get the approval from CEN. A trick is that as the consultants are very busy, and as long as you know who is your consultant, which is not always the case, it's good to try to get a date not too close to the request, because CEN take a couple of days before replying. So it is recommended to try to have a meeting, let's say, from 1 month from now, to be sure that the exchange of information will be going smoothly. You need to fill in, when you get a tentative date where your convener, chair, and yourself are available, possibly your PM, you can fill in the CEN platform in order to get a blessing on the slot you propose for a meeting. Usually, personally, I recommend to get slot of 2 hours, because telco meetings of more than 2 hours is very difficult to tackle. Yeah.
Could I just ask?
Yes.
You said there that the meeting between the past consultant is with the TC, so it's not with the working group who wrote the standard.
It depends from TC to TC, but usually it will be the working group convener plus 1 or 2 experts and the secretariat. And it depends from the engagement, I will say, of the TC chair, also the size of the TC. Usually the TC chair will participate as well, plus the program manager or account manager. This small group. More people you have, more difficult it is to get a date, of course. And you need to get a date where the consultant is free as well. That's why we need really to plan it. And the key person you need to have in front of you is the consultant, of course. So you need to focus on the availability of the consultant before asking some dates which maybe interest the convener, but it's not at all suitable for the consultant. This was my message. This is the document you will normally receive, because sometimes there are problems with the tool. When of course, when we have finished the editing, as explained by Nuno this morning, we will send the document via a platform to CEN. CEN will choose a consultant. They will give them a contract. They will give them the document, and then there will be some work with a consultant. Then there will be this check by CEN quality process, and then CEN will release the document back through the platform. And as TC secretary, you are notified, and the PM as well will be notified, but for you, you are here as technical body officer, your TC secretary will be notified by this message, and the zip file contain all the information related to the compliance or not compliance of the assessment, a list of comments from the consultant or several consultants. It can happen that, for example, for machine that you have two consultants, one noise and one machine, and you will have maybe two set of comments. And this is the basis that you will have to give to your convener, of course, to study the comments of the consultant and see how to tackle, because if you are, for example, before a formal vote, obviously there is an urgent need to get a resolution and try to see how to accommodate the comments from the consultant. And that's why a discussion is certainly very important. So usually there are 3 types of compliance. The ideal situation compliance, I don't think I need to make some big comments. Lack of compliance means that it's really not good at all. There are a lot of problems. conditional compliance, usually it will be related to the fact that you forgot some minor editing things, like you forgot to date or you wrongly date a normative reference. Here, I suppose most of you have access to projects online. There has been some recent improvement in the tool, which allow you, for the items connected to legislation and standardization request, to get some more information. So I invite you to have a look. You will see the link to the mandate. Here is machinery mandate and the directive, and it gives the latest, let's say, the log of the latest assessment, or in this case, the first working draft is a lack of compliance. See. There are 4 stages where you could get an assessment. For the moment, I see that on this slide is still first working draft. We will explain later that the first working draft is not anymore valid. We'll get more and more mature draft assessment. Then we have an assessment during the inquiry, is classical like in the past, and one at formal vote level. If there is still a non-compliant assessment at formal vote, you have 2 possibilities, which will be described in the following slide. Either you try to get a second assessment before the formal vote, and it's what we call last confirmatory assessment. It's a last chance to make it right. So you can do it before formal vote or after formal vote. So the LCI is a full assessment like the formal vote or inquiry assessment. And so here it describes the situation where you have a norm-grown standard in ISO, and think you got a formal vote assessment negative, so you will try to resolve it before the formal vote and ask for a new assessment, and hopefully it will be okay at formal vote, during formal vote, and you can then continue with the publication and offering the standard to OJEU. And there is another scenario where you do it after the formal vote.
Okay, so Thierry presented you the existing or the current process for developing harmonized standards. And what I'm going to present to you next will confuse you, because we are changing the current process of developing harmonized standards to a new process that we call the innovative process for the harmonized standards development. Tomorrow, I will just give you some highlights. Tomorrow there will be a specific session on the innovative process, on the quality check, on the common checklist, but we think that it's important for you to learn that there are 2 existing processes. We have the current one, and you have one that is coming very soon for the development of harmonized standards. Why are we changing the current process? And the answer is very clear. This is because it's very difficult to have positive assessments. If you look at data, if you look at the figures, if you look at the previous HAS assessment contract, which started in 2018 until March 2022, we can see that we only got around 30% of positive assessment, which for all stages. So this means first working draft, inquiry assessment, formal vote assessment, and publication assessment. Of course, if you look at the formal vote, for obvious reasons, the results will be a little bit higher because there were many assessments, or well, 1 or 2 assessments before. but still the results are very low. If you look at the current data, we have changed the contract, the Haas contract. It was signed somewhere in August 2022, but only became really operational as of January 2023. And we still see that the results are not very good. So we still have a low percentage of positive assessment for all stages, 16%, as you can see here. So this means that we need to do something to improve these results. Back in 2021, the Commission, together with CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI, they have created a task force on the timely development of European harmonized standards. The initial goal of this task force was really to see how can standards be developed faster, be published on time, and be cited in a quick way. So one of the goals of the task force was to look at the problems, try to solve them in order to have the development of the standard much quicker. So the result, one of the outcomes of the task force was the innovative process for the development of the harmonized standards. It was agreed in the task force, again, between CEN, CENELEC, ETSI, and the Commission. It was agreed there. And then the proposal, the technical board members were also involved in this development process. And the technical boards agreed in September on this innovative process for harmonized standards. So there was a BT decision approving this process. The innovative process applies to homegrown standards. So as we saw early in the morning, homegrown standards that are poorly developed by a CEN-TC, and for new work items that are launched for approval as of the 1st of October 2023. So this means, and this is the confusing part, this means that your technical committee may have two different processes working in parallel, depending when the work item was created. If it was created before the new work item was launched before the 1st of October, it means that the process described by Thierry applies. If it was launched after the 1st of October, it means that this innovative process will apply. I know that for some TCs that do not work yet on harmonized standards and will only work in the near future, you don't need to focus on the current process, and you need to focus rather on the innovative process. Another important element is that the innovative process do not apply yet for parallel work with ISO under the Vienna Agreement. So this process for parallel, the innovative process for parallel, is still under discussion, but it is very likely that in the next months there will be as well a precise process for innovative process for the parallel work. There are two important, so this is for me the most important information I want you to remember about innovative process. There are two main concepts that we are introducing with innovative process. The first one is we are introducing a CEN quality check, which will be performed by CCMC. So this is a new concept. It does not exist in the current process. So this means that CCMC will help you, will support you in trying to identify some well-known horizontal issues. So the Commission, as you may know, they have some horizontal criteria for assessing the standards for citation. So we will look at that. We will look at the internal regulations part 3 rules. We will look at normative references, and we will give you this feedback. And the comments related to the internal regulations part 3 and normative references, you shall take that into account. You need to include that in your standard. Other comments are rather recommendations from your side, but if you decide not to include those additional comments, then you should provide a justification for that. So be aware that CCMC will not interfere with the technical content. This is up to you. We'll just look at some horizontal issues in order to maximize your chances of having a positive assessment by the Haas consultant. So it's a service for you to help you. And this assessment, this quality check will be based on a common checklist. The checklist is also one of the deliverables of this task force between the Commission and CEN and CENELEC. So there were in the past multiple checklists. CEN has had their own checklist. The consultant had the Haas assessment report checklist. The commission had their own checklist. We decided, let's have just one common checklist. So this means that this common checklist must be used by you for your self-assessment when you develop your standard before submitting the document to us. It will be used by us for the quality check, and it will be used by the consultant for performing the assessment. The second important concept that we are introducing in the innovative process is the mature draft concept. This is something that you never heard. You only heard about first working draft, you heard about inquiry draft, and you heard about final draft. We are introducing a new concept, a mature draft. So for you, it will actually not change much. A mature draft is a document that, from your perspective, it's finalized for inquiry. But instead of starting with inquiry procedures, what you do is that you will submit the document to CCMC for a quality check. We will perform the quality check. We'll send you the comments. You will integrate the comments accordingly. And then you bounce back the document to us, revised, and we will request the mature draft Haas assessment. Again, this is a new element. What is important to note is that the first working draft Haas assessment is no longer possible under the innovative process. So this is not possible anymore. Yeah, there is a question over there at the end.
A question about timing for writing a mature draft. How many time can you have of writing a mature draft? That means that all the technical experts are agreeing on the topics, all the topics. So, this is a question then to understand, because
well, I will come back to that later, but the recommendation would be to have that you allocate. Now we come back to the flex that I explained in the morning. The recommendation is that you allocate 50 weeks to draft the standard, or to the stage where you draft the standard and then we will intervene with quality check, plus there will be a mature draft Haas assessment. So the advice would be that you allocate around 50 weeks, but it is important to know that we will intervene and we will take some time from the drafting for these formal procedures like quality check, requesting the assessment. You will need again to revisit the draft. So, and you also have the possibility at any time to request for a tolerance.
another question, because I'm in a group with a lot of different point of view, and we discussed for more than 1 year the main topic of the draft. And so now we are ready for a preliminary work item, but we work on the main topics for more than, I think, 1.5 years. So we entering the standardization before only when we have already defined the index, all the topics and the procedure. So how can you manage to, when there are a lot of point of view on the table?
I mean, if you are in a good position that you don't have a strict deadline in the standardization request, you may take more time to discuss the draft during the preliminary work item stage. But if you are, and I understand that there could be different views and it takes time to reach consensus, the challenge for you and for us is that the Commission sometimes will give us a very short deadline to deliver the standards. There is no time for the preliminary work item, and it means that in the working group, you need to respect the deadlines in the standardization request. It means that you need to move fast and try to respect the deadline, try to reach consensus as fast as possible. I know this answer is not completely good for you, but unfortunately, this situation will happen that the experts in the working group will be under pressure. There is a tight deadline, and you need to do your best to reach consensus in order to meet the targets in the standardization request. Because I don't know in which sector you work, but if you have a standardization request and you have a specific deadline, if you don't deliver the standards within that deadline, there are multiple options. And one of the options is that the Commission would then produce an amendment of the standardization request to give you more time, or the Commission might say, you don't have more time anymore to develop the standard because you didn't meet the deadline. So we really need to try to stick to those deadlines, even though I know it will be very challenging sometimes in the working groups to reach the consensus and to do things on time. But I do understand your point. Thank you. Okay, so there are 4 assessments per work item. So during the lifespan of the work item, there is the possibility of having 4 assessments. The first one is the mature draft assessment, which is mandatory. I just explained this in the previous slide. The inquiry assessment is conditional. So if the mature draft assessment is negative, this means that you're going to have as well the inquiry assessment. The pre-formal vote assessment is mandatory, but is sort of conditional as well, that only takes place if the draft does not skip the formal vote. So if after the inquiry there are technical comments, or if the assessment was lack of compliance, you must have a pre-formal vote assessment. And similarly to the current process, there is this last confirmatory assessment, LCA, which, by the way, is a terrible acronym, because LCA is often confused or used for life cycle assessment, but this was a term that the Commission decided. So here is very similar to what I explained you early in the morning. This is the flex process that includes, that is applicable to harmonized standards. So there are additional elements here. Again, similarly to what I explained in the morning, stage A and stage E means that the flex applies is a stage for you to draft the standard, and you need to define within a time frame, you need to define how much time you want to allocate for stage A and for stage E. You may remember that the total time is 68 weeks. And the recommendation from the technical board is that you allocate 50 weeks for stage A and 18 weeks for stage E. So if you are in the left side of the graph, when you are drafting the document, when you basically conclude the technical content, you have your mature draft ready. This is what it means. You submit the document to us, and we are now in the block K in yellow on the left side. CCMC will perform a quality check, and we will submit the document to you, as I just explained. You will revise the document as needed, and then we are in the block I on the left. We will request the mature draft Haas assessment, and after this stage, you still have the possibility, when you receive the assessment report, to organize a meeting with the consultant, revise the document accordingly to address the comments from the consultant, and then you can submit the document to CCMC for the inquiry procedures. As I said, if this first mature draft assessment is lack of compliance, then you're going to have the next block I, you're going to have another inquiry assessment. So, and the same after the inquiry, which is stage D, there is a second quality check. So when you finalize your document, we are in stage E now, basically we will proceed for a second quality check. So this means that in this process, CCMC will intervene 2 times with the quality check. And then you're going to have a max of 4 assessments. In the next slide, I will zoom in the left side of this diagram, and I don't think we need to zoom in the next one. Is just to show you, and tomorrow this will be given in more detail. But this means that when you submit the document to CCMC for the quality check, the advice that we give you is that you already try to plan a possible working group meeting to discuss the outcome of the CCMC assessment. Normally, the quality check done by CCMC will have a time frame of 3 weeks. Obviously, we will not need 3 weeks to perform the assessment, but since we might receive many requests for assessment, we need to have enough time to manage the workload. Then after the quality check, you're going to have 4 weeks to revise the document accordingly. We will request the assessment. This normally takes 5 weeks. You have then five additional weeks then to reconsider the comments from the consultant. Now, if you are running out of time, and we are at, let's say, almost at inquiry stage after the inquiry assessment, if you think that you do not have enough time, then our recommendation is that this would be the right time where you request a tolerance. You take a TC decision for a tolerance of 9 months. So in a nutshell, tomorrow this will be explained more in detail, of course. Yeah.
Is this an optional stage, or is this mandatory? Because it's drawn a little bit different to the other stages. That's the reason. The small boxes.
It's
compared to the hard stages.
It's mandatory. So all.
Why is this drawn this way?
Which one?
The K and the I. It's just a box and not
So,
the hard.
Yeah. So the thing is, so we will intervene during the drafting process. So normally should be time allocated to you, and this process is during the drafting, so we can help you to improve the document. So
So the Wien also the document is not 100% ready.
from your point of view, the document, from a working group point of view, you should say we are ready. But you submit to us, and then we are like, we're just going to check if the document is compliant with certain horizontal criteria of the Commission. And if we notice that, for example, some normative references are undated, or if the Annex ZA is not correct in terms of template, we will just give you this feedback and ask you to improve the document, but more from these horizontal aspects. Okay. All right. My last slide on the innovative process is, as I said earlier, there are two processes ongoing. You might be in a situation of just having the current process that Thierry explained, and you are already invited on a voluntary basis to request a quality check. So you can already, for inquiry, before inquiry or before formal vote, you can already submit the document to us, and we will help you with a quality check. So this is strongly recommended. We do not have the IT tools in place. So if you want a quality check on a document that is using the current process, this means that you need to send an email to this email address here, hsc@censenelec.eu. Again, tomorrow there'll be a much more detailed explanation about this process. Now, my colleague Joanna will continue the presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanna Frankowska. I'm a sectoral project manager for machinery. I've been working in CEN Standardization Management Center for 9 years now, and I will present you the key information regarding the work that is carried out together with ISO, International Standardization Organization. So this kind of cooperation we call Vienna Agreement work. So why do we call it Vienna Agreement? Because this is the name of the agreement, formal agreement that was signed between CEN and ISO in 1991. It's the agreement about the technical cooperation. Why it was signed? It was signed mainly to avoid duplication of resources. And I will also give you some more objectives and principles of this agreement. In practice, there are several official documents available. The most basic one is guidelines on implementation of Vienna Agreement. And here in this slide that you will receive after the training, you have the links to these documents that are available on both CEN websites and ISO public websites. There are also two other documents that are more pragmatic. One of them is day-to-day management. This is the name of this document. And another one are frequently asked questions. As regards the proportion of the projects that are carried out together with ISO comparing to all CEN projects. So the work that is carried out together with ISO that we called Vienna Agreement is about 35%. That was like that in 22. And there is also some little percentage, less than 1% of the work that is based on the ISO documents, but these documents have been to some extent modified. They're not exactly the same, and they were transferred to CEN, but in a modified version. So I have already mentioned that the main objective was to avoid duplication of work and to efficiently use the resources. It's very important principle of CEN that in the first place we develop standards at international level, if possible, so international first. At the same time, ISO recognizes the European special situation. For example, in the first, this is mainly about, of course, having the standards linked with the EU legislation in the field of the single European market, so-called harmonized standards. In practice, this work together is carried out respecting the rules of both organizations. The work is carried out in a way that the votes are synchronized, and I will explain a bit more. It's also very often that over the course of time, it is decided to transfer the work that initially was carried out in CEN to ISO, so that the standards that years ago were developed in CEN now can be taken up at the ISO level, but in the cooperation with CEN, so that in the end we have identical EN ISO standards. So here on this slide, you have the example of what I have just mentioned, that initially in the past, we had purely CEN standard that we call homegrown. Its name is EN 15157, and you will see that over the course of time it was decided to transfer this work at international level. And first we had the ISO standard 17142 based on this CEN standard, but then in the end we have EN ISO identical global standard that replaces this old CEN standard. So there are several modes of cooperation between CEN and ISO, starting from less advanced modes of cooperation that is about simply exchange of information. So for your information, CEN CENELEC Management Center and ISO Central Secretariat, they exchange the information of the respective work programs on a daily basis. Vienna Agreement is about cooperation by correspondence. So, for example, CEN-TC secretary normally should exchange the information about the most important activities in CEN-TC with the ISO TC secretary, that is called committee manager, in case we have the situation that there is a CEN-TC that mirrors the ISO work. Also, Vienna Agreement foresees the right of each TC to have representatives in the other TC. So CEN-TC can have a representative in the ISO TC and the other way around. Now moving to the more advanced modes of cooperation. So there is a possibility to adopt the documents, already existing documents of the other organization, but this is after these documents have been published, so there is a kind of less influence on the content. So the ideal mode of cooperation, the most advanced one, is about developing the standards together at the same time, and this is what is the parallel work. So now with the next slides, I will walk you through the respective stages of such a situation where both CEN and ISO TCs develop one standard, one global EN ISO standard at the same time. So how to register such a project? First of all, it is important that before this formal registration takes place, that both technical committees de facto exchange with each other and confirm that indeed there is an agreement to have such a project together. So there always needs to be contact between two technical committees, and this is very important. This is why I will highlight this several times during this presentation. This is why the documents about Vienna Agreement mention clearly that the secretary of CEN and ISO should check whether indeed the work together should start, and if yes, they should ensure that the project is created. It means that CEN TC secretary ensures that the project is created in CEN, and ISO secretary, and that is called committee manager, so I will now use committee manager in ISO, ensures that the project is created in ISO. Now I will maybe concentrate more on CEN, as you are from CEN. This is done in line with normal rules for the creation of the project. As for purely CEN standards, it is necessary to have a CIB on the creation of the project, and in the new work item form, there's a place dedicated to mention that this work should be done under Vienna Agreement. Yes?
If you say created, you need to have parallel you work at a proposal running for.
So there is the rules.
New project.
If I understood well your question, there is no rule saying, so it can be done either one organization starts the creation earlier, first CEN can create the project, then ISO, or they start the ballots at the same time, or first ISO, then CEN. But normally, ideally, more or less at the same time, of course, so that the other organization doesn't wait too long. Because normally these projects should be created in CEN and ISO before inquiry phase starts. So of course, this should be synchronized. So now I mentioned the CIB, so creation of the project in CEN. However, there's a specificity in case there is a revision of already existing EN ISO project. So for brand new standards, for brand new EN ISO standards, it is necessary to have a 2-month CIB to create the project in CEN. But in case it is the revision of already existing EN ISO standard, then it is sufficient that the project is created in ISO. ISO Central Secretariat notifies CEN Management Center, and CCMC registers this project in CEN. So we say this project is created automatically without the need to have CIB. It will be created automatically. And by default, it is registered under the ISO lead. So normally, most of the projects that are developed together with ISO are developed with ISO lead. It is possible to have a CEN lead, but this is quite rare. So even for harmonized standards, most often you have the ISO lead because it doesn't make any problem for this. Now I would like to also bring your attention how to make the link to the EU legislation for these projects that are developed together with ISO, in case these are revisions and these projects are created, as I said, explained automatically. So such a project will be created by CCMC, but it will be always created without any link to EU legislation. It will be always created as non-harmonized standards, and then it is necessary for CEN and ISO TC to reflect, discuss, or even earlier than that, whether you want to have it harmonized standard, because it takes more time, more attention to develop harmonized standards. It is necessary to address consultant comments, to develop Annex ZA, and this has to be informed decision. So even if the previous version was harmonized standard, each time CEN TC secretary will need to confirm to CCMC that the revision of EN ISO standards should be also harmonized standard. In practice, when the project will be created by CCMC, you will receive the email from our data unit, and in this email there will be question to you whether this standard should be harmonized. And then it is very important that you reply to this email accordingly. So now moving to the inquiry stage, which is called this in ISO. In order to start this phase, the secretary of the lead committee, so one committee has the lead, usually it's ISO committee, needs to post all the documents on the ISO submission interface. Most often all the documents are to be submitted on ISO interface. There is one exception for first working draft assessment, so I will explain later on. And otherwise, even for CEN lead, all the documents needs to be submitted on ISO interface. Then ISO Central Secretariat is in charge of the editing, even for CEN lead. And after this is done, they inform CEN Management Center when the inquiry will start. CEN Management Center organizes the German translation, and before that they made the text available to ISO and CEN members for any national translations in relation to this inquiry. And also we inform about the dates of the inquiry in CEN that are normally more or less the same dates, but sometimes there is a small difference in days. Normally inquiry and this normally there are 12 weeks. So for the inquiry, ISO members cast their vote in ISO portal. CEN members cast their vote in the CEN balloting application. Both CEN and ISO have access to the result of votes and comments from other organizations. Then CEN and ISO committee leadership assesses the results and circulate voting results in both committees. And this committee that has the lead, they address the comments. And in practice, the leadership is the leadership of the organization with the lead that addresses the comments from both the organization and the organization that doesn't have the lead. So that was for the inquiry, and this so inquiry in CEN, in ISO we call it this. This phase is called this. Now moving to the formal vote phase, which in ISO is called FDIS. This is very similar. So before explaining this, important to clarify that, as you know, sometimes it is possible to skip a formal vote, and this holds true also for this work carried out together with ISO. Here, important point of attention that in case there is a lack of compliance HAS assessment, so in case such a project is a harmonized standard, and there is a lack of compliance assessment of the inquiry draft, which happens quite often, normally the vote can be skipped only in the case where, thank you for this. Sorry. only can be skipped only if consultants' comments are editorial, which is very, very rare. Normally, all the consultants' comments are technical, or at least you have some comments that are of the technical nature. So this has to be remembered and maybe sometimes reminded to the ISO TC members when it is considered whether to skip formal vote. Yes?
Sorry for asking again, but
No problem. Should I go
I
back?
have a hard time to this. It's really the case that you have the harmonized standards under Vienna. How
Yes.
does that work? I don't understand if you have comments from the HAS assessment.
Mhm.
Who on the ISO side will care about this if they are not European?
Mhm.
Say, I don't care. You don't want to have this.
Mhm.
This is the ISO standard. What you want, I don't care.
Mhm.
That's probably the real answer, isn't it?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So in the machinery sector that I take care of, we have many examples of harmonized standards that are developed together with ISO, but it's fully true that this is a bigger challenge to develop harmonized in ISO standard than to develop purely CEN harmonized standard. It's because there are more actors involved. This requires very good cooperation between at different levels, working group level, CEN and ISO TC level, CCMC and ISO Central Secretariat, who will deal with this aspect. So first of all, you know, CEN members are members of ISO, and in these ISO TCs that develop this harmonized standard that are EN ISO standards, normally you have strong and present CEN members, because there was a need, you know, to have such a standard. Very often, not always, but very often, the project leader is a European project leader, and you have the same persons, or some of these persons are also active in CEN, and they are aware about these European specificities. I'm sorry. But it's true that sometimes it is more difficult, for example, if the project leader is non-European, or for example, in such a case, it is important that there is somebody available from the European to see, available to support the non-European project leader, or non-European chair leadership in the ISO TC. But this is possible.
But even if you have European leadership, you don't have a guarantee. You don't have a guarantee that everything goes smoother.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I'm sorry.
Even if you have the European leadership in this environment, work environment, I don't believe that this works smoothly. Apparently.
It takes more time to develop harmonized standards, but on the other hand, it's for some topics it's very important to have a global standard that at the same time meets the requirements of the EU legislation. So yes, it's not fully easy, but we do it on a daily basis. It's a big proportion, for example, in the machinery sector, but also in other sectors, like I think PP, and also in medical devices. We have a quite big number, yes. So as regards skipping the vote, I would like to explain quite a new rule, which in fact will make the work smooth, the process smoother. So for you, it's important to know that in case ISO committee decides to skip the vote, it is not required that CEN TC takes this decision. It means that EN ISO standard will then, in such a situation, move towards the publication. This holds true for the regular cases where in CEN and in ISO we have inquiry, and then it is decided to skip the vote. But also the skipping of the vote happens for some specific cases, some specific modes of development of standards that are used in ISO. For example, one of these cases are when ISO adopts the document from other organization, or so-called minor revision, which is the revision that is only about having editorial changes. This is something that doesn't exist in CEN. It exists only in ISO. And for example, for these two specific ways of development of standards in ISO proceeds in a fast way. It means that after registration of the project in ISO, they go directly to vote, so to FDs. This is not possible in CEN. In CEN, it's not possible to skip inquiry. In ISO, it is possible to skip this this phase. So when we have such a situation, ISO goes directly to FDs, but in CEN we cannot skip inquiry. So we have in ISO FDs, and in CEN we have inquiry. And then after this, given that ISO is already after FDs, the vote in CEN is skipped. And again, it's not necessary to have any TC decision. Now, how to proceed for the vote. This is very analogous to what takes place for the inquiry. So again, the documents are posted on the ISO submission interface. ISO Central Secretariat edits the documents, informs about the dates of the vote, has assessment. In case it's harmonized standard, which is not always, has assessment takes place before the formal vote. And here, important to remember that in case this has assessment is a lack of compliance, then a formal vote, but also FDs is put on hold so that CEN and ISO-TC can resolve the assessment. So the same as for the inquiry phase, CCMC informs our members of the dates of the vote and also circulates the German translations. The vote takes place 8 weeks. And in the same way as for the inquiry, ISO casts the vote in the ISO system, CEN members cast the vote in the CEN balloting application. And all the secretary of ISO circulates the documents in ISO-TC, CEN-TC secretary circulates the documents in CEN-TC. Then after the vote, if the outcome is positive in both organizations, ISO Central Secretariat finalizes the text, introducing editorial changes if needed, and then ISO Central Secretariat sends the text to the secretary of the lead committee. Most often it is ISO that has the lead for the review. The secretary of the TC that doesn't have the lead is informed. Then ISO Central Secretariat notifies CCMC when the document will be published, so informs us about the date of the publication. And normally the document in CEN is published a bit later, few weeks later than it is the case in ISO, because we need to prepare the European elements, which are, for example, European forward. This is the forward that is not part of the ISO standard, the title page of an ISO document, we have to ensure the final translations into German, and also of the Annex ZA. So that was for the publication, and I'm sorry. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. So it's also, it is ISO Central Secretariat that always edits the text, even if it's CEN lead. But then if it's CEN lead, then it is CEN TC secretary that reviews the document. So this review is more, I guess, more or less similar to what is called proofing in CEN. So that was for the process. I will say at the end a few words about the Annex ZA. But now I will say a few words how to revise or amend the document. So first of all, it's important to know that it's ISO that is in charge of carrying out the review of the documents. So the review takes place only in ISO and not in CEN. For the time being, the outcome of this review is not registered in the CEN database, so you will not see in projects, for example, that ISO reviewed the document after 5 years and confirm it, but this should come in the future. In case it is decided to have the amendment or revision of the document that was published together under Vienna Agreement between CEN and ISO, then again the process is the same as I explained. So the same steps take place. Then we have also so-called minor revision that I have already explained. That is the revision that introduces only editorial changes. This is something that exists in ISO, and then we follow. And finally, also sometimes ISO corrects the publications, and then it's handled by ISO Central Secretariat. We are informed that ISO made such a correction, and we make the information about it in the CEN database that such a correction took place, but we don't change the date of the main publication. We just issued a dispatch notice about such a correction. So now again, on this slide, I would like to repeat all the steps that take place in order to develop EN ISO standard and to revise it or to amend it, and maybe to highlight that at the beginning it's very important to have the agreement, de facto agreement between two TCs that such a work should be carried out together. As already mentioned, apart from this possibility of having the work carried out together, which is the ideal one, it's also possible for each organization to adopt the already existing documents of the other organization. Simply then one of the organizations, so let's say here CEN, takes the ISO standard and submits it to the adoption by CEN using CEN procedures. Just that in such a case, given that it's about normally most often identical adoption of already existing document, the vote in CEN is skipped automatically. We just have inquiry. But also important for you to know that we still need some time before we move to the inquiry, because we need to ensure the translation into German, and this takes 8 weeks. Ideally, such adoption should be done in an identical way, but sometimes it must be maybe concluded that it is necessary to make the changes into the existing document. Then the best in such a case is to enter into the revision together with ISO. But if it's not possible, then sometimes, not ideal, but okay, sometimes it is needed to have the adoption done in a way that some part of the text is modified. But then we don't have anymore this unique EN ISO standard, and also the reference of the standard in CEN is different than the one in ISO. And as you can remember, it's less than 1% of the work. So now I will move slowly towards the end of the presentation. I will just give some information dedicated to HAS assessment of EN ISO standards. So the assessments can be carried out at first working draft stage, at inquiry, formal vote stage, and there can be also the last assessment, last confirmatory assessment, as it was explained by my colleagues. So here, as for purely CEN standards, we can have maximum 4 assessments, and the quality check most probably will be introduced for EN ISOs, but here the first working draft assessment will stay, right? So that is a bit different than for the purely CEN standards. How these assessments are triggered. So you may remember I said that during the development of EN ISO standards, almost all the time the documents are submitted on the ISO submission interface. The only exception is when there is a need to have a first working draft assessment. Here, exceptionally, the documents needs to be submitted on the CEN submission interface by CEN TC secretary. So most often, CEN TC secretary needs to get from the ISO, ISO's committee manager, the CD draft, and submits it on the CEN submission interface with the information that the request first working draft assessment is needed. For the inquiry and formal vote stage, you don't need to do anything. The assessment, HAS assessment will be requested by default. Of course, if it is a harmonized standard that is being developed. For last confirmatory assessment, this is, as you may remember, optional in general. So first it has to be agreed, discussed between CEN and ISO TC whether to use this assessment. This is in general recommended if the previous assessment was lack of compliance. And then the documents are submitted on the ISO submission interface. Why, you may ask, even if it's us that request the assessment. The reason is that it's the ISO Central Secretariat that edits the draft. Key information, some key points for attention regarding HAS assessments of EN ISO standards. So even if it's ISO lead, EN ISO standard, the assessment is provided to CEN TC secretary, and it's a task of CEN TC secretary to submit it to ISO committee manager, and also it's the task of CEN TC secretary to monitor the progress. Why? Because it's CEN ownership to deal with the aspects that are linked with the EU legislation, so with the HAS assessments also. It's very important to have very good cooperation between 2 technical committees to solve these assessments. Again, even if it's isolated, because they might require help to address consultant comments, especially if the project leader is not European. They might not be aware about the rules of the Commission regarding harmonized standards. The LCA is recommended, as I said, in case there is lack of compliance assessment at formal vote and the TC still would like to continue the work on harmonized standards, which is most often the case. However, if it is concluded that it's not possible to resolve all the consultants' comments, then sometimes, it's not often, but sometimes both CEN and ISO TCs conclude that the project should be deharmonized, because what is key most often for the TCs is to have, in the end, identical EN ISO standard and ISO standard, even if it will be temporarily published as a non-harmonized standard. And then in these cases, most often harmonization is achieved with the next addition. I have already mentioned that it's necessary that CEN, TC, and working group are available to support ISO committee to resolve assessment. For your information, as there are more actors involved in the development of EN ISO standard, and sometimes it might be tricky to know which steps exactly needs to be taken in order to solve lack of compliance formal vote assessment. The process with respective steps was developed, the flow chart, and it's available under this link. Hopefully it will help you to know who does what and which steps exactly are needed in order to address such an assessment. And then my final start regarding Annex ZA. Again, here it's important to be ready to provide the support to ISO technical committee if the project leader is not European, or if they have problems to develop it. It might be that it will be somebody in the ISO working group that will say that they want to develop this Annex ZA. This is case by case. This is done case by case. But it is again key to make sure that they know how to do it, and that they receive support from CEN leadership, working group leadership, or from CEN TC secretary if needed. For the Annex ZA, Annex ZA is part of the draft, even in ISO, of the ISO draft, almost until the end. It's just that at the end it is removed from the ISO text, whereas it is attached to the EN ISO standard. So in the end, Annex ZA is not there in the ISO standard. It is only the part of EN ISO standard. So it's a European element of such a standard. However, how to include it there in this ISO text? It is also the task of CEN TC secretary to make sure that this Annex ZA is included. So it's not your task it's not the task of the TC secretary to draft this Annex ZA, but you need to ensure that it is provided to you, and then to provide it to ISO TC secretary, so that ISO TC secretary includes it in the ISO inquiry draft or in the ISO FD's draft. And I have already said that at the end it is removed from the ISO text, whereas it is the part of the CEN text. So that was the end. If there are any questions, I don't know whether we have time or we have, I guess.
We still have 5 minutes.
Okay, so then I will be happy to take your questions if there are any. Yes, please.
In case of 9 months tolerance request by Vienna Agreement from CEN lead, is it then from the CEN, the ballot? The ballot, is it at CEN or at ISO level?
Oh. So in case we have CEN lead, so it's a CEN time frame, so then tolerance can be indeed used, and it's the ballot in CEN. And for CEN lead, indeed, the CEN timeframe, CEN process is used, and ISO follows us. Whereas if it's ISO lead, then it's ISO timeframe, and we just follow.
Yeah. Yeah, you said that the next CE will be removed from ISO text before publishing. Could you please give more details about this?
So Annex ZA is part of the ISO standard. Yes, it is part of the draft ISO standard at the time of the inquiry, which is called this, and at the time of the formal vote, which is called FDs in ISO. You will see that it's part of the text that is submitted to inquiry, this formal vote and FDs. But then at the very end, after the FDs in ISO, as this is the European annex, European element, ISO Central Secretariat editors will remove this annex ZA, so they will not include it in the final text. So in ISO, so you have that. So in the ISO standard will not have annex ZA. However, at the same time, in CEN, we will publish the European elements of the EN ISO standard. So annex ZA is one of them. And it will be published only in CEN. It will be part of the EN ISO document. Yes.
Could you try to give some details on the resolvement of the HAS process with the between CEN and ISO? So as I saw on the slides before, it was a communication from the I cannot read this, but maybe the slide before, or maybe you just go through this. Yes, just that. Well, it's just that it was communication between the ISO secretariat and the CEN secretariat, but what is expected from the ISO secretariat of a further process? But I guess it's the project editors and working groups should be involved, or how is the process from there?
So in practice, the main responsibilities are within CEN TC secretary, but the ISO TC secretary needs to be aware of what is going on, which way forward is decided regarding HAS assessment, to advise ISO TC also on the possibilities, which can be to continue the work, to, for example, maybe temporarily the harmonize, to monitor also a bit. It's mainly the CEN TC secretary job to monitor that the assessment is solved, but it's also ISO TC secretary that will monitor that the project is not on hold too much. Sometimes there are the meetings, quite often, in fact, in case there's lack of compliance assessment, it is necessary to have a coordination meeting between the leadership of both TCs, and then often it can be that not only CEN TC secretary participates, but it's also ISO TC secretary participates to be aware of the status, and also to take part in this discussion. Normally, this requires the involvement of the parties from both CEN side and ISO side in general. But you're right, it's mainly CEN responsibility to resolve this assessment. On the other hand, it's ISO lead, so normally the work is carried out in ISO, and this is then you know, a kind of mix of this situation, CEN responsibility, but ISO work, and we have to combine these two together.
Could I just have a follow-up question? So what mandate does a CEN secretariat operates under ISO? in resolving this discussion? Because if it is an ISO lead, the decision is under ISO directives and ISO rules and so on. So what was mandates to the secretary participate in working group meetings and try to resolve the comments, or how does it work in practice?
I'm not sure whether I understood everything, but in practice, it is the project leader, ISO project leaders, that has the lead in solving the assessment. But normally he requires some support from the CEN side.
Okay, but this is a bit informal.
Informal, like this is de facto required in order to solve it.
I'm just asking because as a secretariat, as a CEN leadership, you are signed that you want to follow the standardization request and develop harmonized standards, right? But the ISO project leader has not signed anything, so they can. Yes, the other question there, they are not obliged to, of course, in theory. But if you have something that has to be resolved, you don't have any, real power as a CEN secretariat or CEN leadership besides trying to get your point through by dialogue.
So I don't agree that that there is no power as such, because in the end there is a wish to have harmonized standard, and normally the ISO TC wants to have this aim, to have this at the end this outcome. So you have this power because you can tell them, if you don't do this, you will not have the standard cited, in brief. Of course, I know it's not as easy as that, but we can say briefly that this is the message to be conveyed. Like you need to, for example, it's good. I recommend, for example, to have the meeting with the consultant, and it's a CEN TC secretary job to organize such a meeting because it's CEN responsibility. CEN side explains how to do it. You explain you need to follow this rule for normative references. You have to follow this rule for the Annex Z8. If you don't do it, then the standard will not be accepted. So it might be difficult. I don't say it's always easy, but I think this argument is normally sufficient to convince the other parts to do it.
Okay, it makes sense, but it's a big challenge if you have on less than 2 years to develop a European home standard. So
it's not easy sometimes for non-European members to wait. I fully understand. Yes. Sometimes the decision is to publish non-harmonized standards and to have harmonization with the next edition then. But most often the TCs prefer to wait because for them it's important to have harmonized standards, or also for the non-European members. For the market needs.
But my point is, if you have a standardization quest, for example, I'm from KTC 21, where you have a standardization quest to the level standards in the 1st of 2025, so that less than 2 years.
Okay.
So if you need to have all this kind of dialogue, you're spending a lot of time, and then you have to maybe break off the process in the end. And then you have wasted your opportunity to follow up on the deadlines of the standardization request. So that's the tricky part here, I think, that you use a lot of time on this. And as you explained it, it sounds like a very time-consuming process. And you don't have the luxury to wait for another revision to make it harmonized.
I don't know, the details of this work, but maybe I don't, bluntly say that this is to be done, but maybe another ideas. It's like if it's completely not possible to develop identical EN ISO standard, maybe for the time being, the conclusion would be to develop only the standard in CEN and to have it done together with ISO for the next edition.